Hi, welcome to MooMooMath. Today we are going to learn about the law of cosine. Actually, not cosines, but law of cosine. And here's our formula. It's a squared plus b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of angle A. So this works with certain types of triangles. We're going to look at what information you need to be able to use these. And then this formula has two more forms, and that would be if we are looking for side B instead of A, then we would use a squared plus c squared minus 2ac times the cosine of angle B. So whichever side we're looking for, we're using that associated angle. And then of course, if we're looking for C, we can use c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab times cosine of the angle C. So those are the three forms of the law of cosine. Now, when do we use the law of cosine? And we use it kind of in two scenarios. We use it with side, side, side when we know all three sides and no angles. So a situation like this on the left, or a side, an included angle, and a side. So something like this, side with an included angle and a side. That's when we don't know an angle and its opposite side, because if we do know an angle and the opposite side, we use the law of sine. So these are the cases where we use the law of cosine. So please always remember and never forget, when using the law of cosine, you're going to want to start with the largest angle first. So let's say you have a side, side, side situation. You're going to look at the side that's 15 because it's the longest side, and the angle opposite that side, in this case angle A, that would be your largest angle. So you would want to solve for that angle first. So let's try a couple of these. So we're going to start with example 1. This is where we're given all three sides. We're going to solve the triangle, meaning we're going to find all three angles. So let's start with the largest angle. So the longest side is this side AC, which is 19 feet. So that means angle B would be the largest angle. So we're going to use the equation b squared is equal to a squared plus c squared minus 2 times a times c times the cosine of the angle B. So let's look what we don't know. We do know B, we do know A, we do know C, so we can plug in A and C here, but we don't know angle B. So this is what we're solving for. So now let's just plug in what we know. We know that B squared is 19, A squared, or that's 19 squared, A squared is 8 squared, plus c squared is 14 squared, minus the two sides we do, the two sides we're using here. So we're going to take 2 times 8 times 14 times the cosine of B. So now we're just going to grab our calculators and let's work this one backwards. So we've got 19, and we're going to square that, and we're going to get 361 is equal to, well, 8 squared is 64, and 14 squared is 196. So I'm just going to double check, make sure 14 squared is indeed 196. Yeah, I thought it was. So minus 2 times, let's go ahead and multiply this out. I'm going to go ahead and multiply 2 times 8 times 14. So let's take 2 times 8 times 14, and that's going to give us 224. So that's our coefficient to the cosine of B. So 224 cosine of B. Now we need to isolate cosine B. So the first thing we want to do is subtract 64 from both sides. And we want to subtract 196 from both sides. So let's take 361 and subtract, whoops, that's a 6, and subtract those two. So 361 minus 64 minus a 196. And that gives us 101. So we have 101 is equal to negative, don't forget to bring that negative down, 224 cosine B. Now we need to solve for the cosine of B, so let's isolate it by dividing both sides by negative 224. So negative 224. Grab your calculators and let's take 101 divided by negative 224. And that gives us negative 0.4509. So I'm going to write that down. Negative 0.4509. And that's equal to the cosine of B. Now, how do you solve for angle B? When you have cosine B is equal to a ratio, you use your inverse button. So let's take second cosine of that decimal, which is just the ratio, and we get 116.8. So 116.8 degrees. And that's equal to angle B. So we've solved for our first angle right here. Angle B is 116.8. Okay, now we need to solve for one more angle. So since we started with the law of cosine, we need to kind of finish with the law of cosine. So I'm going to go back and erase all this. And this time we're going to solve for the second largest angle. So the second largest angle, at this point it doesn't matter so much, but I typically do this just to be careful. Okay, the second largest angle we know is going to be angle C because 14 is longer than 8. And by the triangle inequality theorem, we know that means that angle C is larger. So I'm going to rewrite my equation, this time solving for C. So I'm going to write the law of cosine equation in terms of C. So cosine C. So this is the form I need. Now let's plug in. So we have 14 squared minus 8 squared plus 19 squared minus 2 times 8 times 19 cosine C. So now we got to work backwards. So we're going to square the 14. Well, we just did that. That's 196. And 8 squared, that's 64. And 19 squared, that was 361. So we just used all these numbers in the last problem. Minus 2 times 8 times 19. I don't know that off the top of my head. So let's take 2 times 8 times 19, in other words, 16 times 19, and that gives us 304. So minus 304, that's now the coefficient right here to our cosine C. Now, how do we solve it? We subtract 64 from both sides, and we subtract 361 from both sides. And let's grab our calculators. So 196 minus 64 minus 361. And that gives us negative 229. So we have a negative 229 is equal to, and again, I've got this negative I have to remember to bring down. That's my coefficient, 304, negative 304, cosine C. And let's divide 229 by 304. So let's divide by negative 304. And that gives us 0.7532. So 7532, actually 33. So we have 0.7533, if we round it up, is equal to cosine of C. We divided two negatives, so that's a positive. Then we just need to find C by using inverse cosine. So go back to our calculators and do inverse cosine of the previous answer. And we get 41.1. 41.1 degrees. And that's angle C. So let's see if I can pick that up. I can. There's angle C. And that's my second largest. That means angle A must be pretty small because it's got to be less than 41.1. Well, once you have two angles in a triangle, it's pretty easy. We know the sum of the triangles is 180. So let's take 180 and we're going to subtract 116.8. And then we're going to subtract another 41.1. And guess what? That gives us 22.1, which is our final angle. So 22.1 degrees is angle A. And now we have the whole triangle solved. So that's how you handle side, side, side. It's a little bit of work because we're using the law of cosine, but we're having to work backwards to these angles. So it's a little bit tricky. Now let's look at the one I think is a little easier. What if you're given two sides and an included angle? So you have a side angle side situation, and we want to solve the triangle. Well, if you look at it, we have angle A and then side C and then side B. We don't have the opposite side, so we can't use the law of sine. So it forces us to use the law of cosine. But what's nice about this one is it's pretty straightforward. If we don't know A, I'm going to write this equation in terms of A. So A squared is equal to B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine of A. So that's why we use the side angle side, because B and C are the adjacent sides to angle A. Now, A squared is what we don't know, so let's bring it down. B, I'm going to plug in 10. So 10 squared, which we know is 100, plus 15 squared, that's going to be 225, minus 2 times the B and C right here are just the 10 and the 15, and then cosine of A. But what do we know? We know A is 115 degrees. So now, if you notice, there's no working backwards on this one. We can just solve for A squared. So let's grab our calculators and just type this out. So we have 10, I got to get it over a little bit so I can see my squared button, squared plus 15 squared minus 2 times 10 times 15, all times the cosine of 115 degrees. Hit enter, and that gives us A squared. So don't be tricked and think, oh, 451, that side's 451. It's not even possible because it would be too long. But that's 451 point something. There's point something. So we just want A. We want to know what that length is. Well, all we have to do now is take the square root of this answer. So second and x squared is our square root button. And the second in the previous answer is second minus, or second negative, I should say. And the answer is 21.26. So So 21.26. So now we have a second side, or the last side, 21.26. Now we're not done because we don't have angle B, we don't have angle C. So to solve the rest of this triangle, we're gonna have to work backwards. So let's go ahead and find angle C next because it's the next largest angle. So I've got to write my law of cosine in terms of C. So C squared is equal to A squared plus B squared. And once you write these a few times, they get easier. Minus 2AB cosine times angle C. And now let's plug in. C squared, or C, is 15. So 15 squared, that's going to be 225. A is 21.26. We know that squared is like 480, 451. Yeah, we're going to use that up there. Plus B squared, which is 10, minus 2 times A, which is 21.26, times B, which is 10, times the cosine of C, which we do not know. So we've got to leave that variable in there. Now, whoops, I forgot to write my square right there. Now let's do some calculations. We know we're going to subtract this 21.26 squared, and we're going to subtract 10 squared, and from both sides. So minus 21 and I'm writing all this down. You can probably just type it in your calculator, but I'm going to write it down just to make sure we've got it. So let's grab my calculator. I'm going to take 15 and I'm going to square it, and I'm going to subtract. I'm going to go ahead and write 451.79 because I know what that is. That's actually A squared minus 100, or 10 squared. I'll just go ahead and do 10 squared. Okay, so the left side of my equation is going to be negative 326.79. Okay, and that's equal to all this stuff that's left. Well, we know it's negative, and I've got to multiply 2 times 21.26 times 10. So let's grab our calculator and do 2 times 21.26 times 10. And that's 425.2. And that's the coefficient to cosine C. So divide both sides by that coefficient. So divide it by negative 225.2. Divide by negative 425, excuse me, 0.2. And let's see what we get. So we have let's clear this for a second because it's a negative. Negative 326.79, all divided by 425.2. And that gives us cosine C. Now to find the inverse cosine, we've just been doing this. Let's go ahead and do second cosine, second answer, and boom, it's 140. So 140, that's not possible. What did we do wrong? It's not negative, that's why. So I forgot to divide by a negative 425 right here. So if I do that, that's going to be I'm going to take the, inverse cosine of positive 0.768. I'll just do 555. That's plenty of decimals. And let's get the right answer. That's 39.8. 39.8. That sounds much more realistic. 39.8. because I knew it had to be less than 115. That's how I knew I was wrong. So I've got A, I've got C, all I've got left is B. Well, we got the easy one now because we can just subtract from 180. So let's take 180 and we're going to subtract 115. And we're going to subtract another 39.8. And boom, there's our answer, 25.2. 25.2. Now let's think about triangle inequality theorem. Okay, the largest angle is 115 and the side opposite it is 21.6. The next longest side is 15, the side opposite is 39.8. And the smallest side is 10, so the side opposite it is 25. Yes, that makes sense. As the sides get smaller, the corresponding angles or the angles associated with that side also get smaller. So we've solved the triangle. We had to solve for one side, so we had to do that first. That one was the easy one. Then we had to solve for one of the angles using the law of cosine. And then the last side was pretty easy, or the last angle, you just subtract from 180. So I think side angle side is a tiny bit easier just because you're not using the law of cosine backwards the whole time. So just be careful with your signs. As I just found out, you have to be super careful. Think about the triangle inequality theorem and the ratio of the sides. So I hope this video is helpful and you have learned how to manipulate the law of cosine.